Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be getting microscopic with you, our fellow medical microbiologists.
Yeah, today's deep dive is all about the Chlamydia spp and related organisms.
And to guide us through this tiny world, we'll be pulling information from the second edition of Principles and Practice of Clinical Bacteriology by Gillespie and Hawkey.
I'm excited to unpack some of the most clinically relevant insights about these fascinating bacteria.
Me too. So, to start, what exactly are Chlamydiaceae? I feel like we hear the name chlamydia and it's just kind of out there in the ether, but what makes these guys unique from like all the other bacteria out there?
Well, they're not your run-of-the-mill bacteria, that's for sure.
Okay, good.
Chlamydia are what we call obligate intracellular parasites.
Ah, okay.
Meaning that they can only survive and replicate inside a host cell.
So they need to break in and enter, kind of like I don't know, like a burglar or something.
Exactly. They're completely dependent on their host for survival.
So unlike other bacteria that can just, I don't know, just kind of hang out on a petri dish, these guys need a living cell to actually make more of themselves.
Precisely. And this reliance on a host cell is actually really cool.
Okay.
It's reflected in their genome, which is surprisingly small, even smaller than some viruses.
Wow. Okay, so if they have such small genomes, how do they actually function? Do they, like, steal stuff from the cells that they invade?
That's exactly it. They've streamlined their genetic material down to the bare essentials.
Smart.
Relying on the host cell to provide all the missing pieces.
That is incredibly efficient.
It is.
Talk about, working smarter, not harder, I guess, right?
Right.
But, I mean, how do they even get into a cell? They can't just, knock on the door and say, hey, can I come in?
Not quite. They have a really incredible life cycle. It's called biphasic, meaning they switch between two distinct forms.
Okay, so two forms. What does that even look like?
The first form is called the elementary body, or EB.
Okay, elementary body.
Which is kind of like their tough little armored traveling suit.
Ah.
It's incredibly hardy and allows them to survive outside of a host cell.
Ah, makes sense. Okay.
Resisting environmental stresses.
Okay, so the EB is like their little survival pod until they can find a suitable cell to kind of, break into, right?
Precisely. And once they do find a suitable host cell, they attach, and then they get taken in through a process called endocytosis.
Right, endocytosis.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Ooh, okay.
At this point, they transform into the second form, the reticulate body.
The reticulate body. So we've got the elementary body and the reticulate body.
Yes.
Okay, and what's so special about the reticulate body?
Well, the reticulate body, or RB, this is the form that's metabolically active.
Okay.
Meaning it can divide and multiply within the host cell, creating a whole army of chlamydia.
So it's like the elementary body is the burglar, right, that gets into the house, and then the reticulate body is the one who, like, unlocks all the doors and windows and lets everybody else in.
Exactly. I like that analogy a lot.
Oh, good.
The EB is like the scout that infiltrates the enemy camp, and the RB is the force that takes over from within.
Wow. That's amazing. But if they're replicating inside our cells, how do they manage to, fly under the radar? Like, shouldn't our immune systems detect them and, like, kick them out?
That's actually one of the most intriguing things about their pathogenicity.
Okay.
Chlamydia have evolved some very, very sneaky ways to evade our immune defenses.
Like what kind of tricks do they have up their sleeve?
Well, some species can actually prevent their infected cells from displaying distress signals.
Oh, wow.
That would normally alert the immune system.
So they're like silencing the alarm system.
Exactly. And others can actually produce molecules that directly interfere with the function of immune cells. Oh, wow. So they're like sending out fake signals or something.
You could say that. They're essentially disarming our defenses.
So it's like they're wearing invisibility cloaks and jamming our communication signals all at the same time.
Right.
No wonder they can cause such persistent infection.
Exactly. And this persistent infection can be a real problem because it allows them to cause long-term damage.
So even if you're feeling okay, they could be like quietly causing trouble behind the scenes.
That's why early detection and treatment are so important.
Wow, that's a little unsettling, but I guess that's why we're here, right? To learn more about these guys and how to deal with them.
Absolutely.
So now that we know, how they infect us, let's talk about the infections themselves. I mean, I know that when I hear chlamydia, I immediately think about, sexually transmitted infections.
Right.
But I know that there's a whole spectrum of diseases that these bacteria can cause. Oh, there is. And that's a big part of why we wanted to do this deep dive, to really give a broad overview of all the different things these bacteria can do.
Yeah, so let's break it down, starting with Chlamydia trachomatis. What can it cause?
Well, C. trachomatis is responsible for a lot of different diseases. We've got trachoma, which is one of the leading causes of preventable blindness
Oh, wow, okay.
worldwide.
So it's not just a minor inconvenience, it's actually a serious public health problem.
It is. It is a very serious problem.
Nope.
And it primarily affects the eyes, causing inflammation and scarring that can eventually lead to eyelashes turning inward, damaging the cornea.
Oh, that sounds so incredibly painful.
It can be.
And, I mean, obviously, vision loss is it's a life-altering condition.
Yeah, and that's why it's such a significant problem, especially in developing countries.
I see.
Then we have adult inclusion conjunctivitis, which is basically chlamydia in the eye.
Okay, so, you can get pink eye from chlamydia.
Kind of. It's usually less severe than trachoma,
Okay, that's good, at least.
but it can still cause discomfort and inflammation.
And I'm guessing a lot of people don't even realize that they can get chlamydia in their eye.
You're right, most people don't. And of course, C. trachomatis is also notorious for causing genital infections, which are often asymptomatic,
Oh, right.
but can lead to complications like PID.
Pelvic inflammatory disease.
That's the one. It's a serious condition in women.
Yeah, it can affect fertility, right?
Absolutely. It causes inflammation and scarring in the fallopian tubes, which can increase the risk of ectopic pregnancy and infertility.
Oh, gosh, okay, so these bacteria are not messing around. And it's not just adults who are affected, right? I've heard that babies can contract chlamydia during childbirth.
Yes, that's right. Babies born to mothers with a chlamydia infection can develop neonatal conjunctivitis or even pneumonia.
Oh, wow.
So it's really crucial to screen pregnant women and treat any infections.
Yeah, definitely. To prevent transmission to the newborn.
Yeah.
Okay, so C. trachomatis has quite the resume. What about the other species of chlamydia?
Well, another common one is Chlamydophila pneumonia.
Chlamydophila pneumonia, okay.
It primarily causes respiratory infections.
Oh, okay.
Ranging from mild bronchitis to severe pneumonia.
So everything from a little cough to a serious lung infection.
Pretty much. What's really interesting about C. pneumonia is that it's incredibly widespread, and many people are infected during childhood without ever even knowing it.
So it's like this silent epidemic spreading through the population.
Exactly. And while most people experience very mild symptoms or no symptoms at all, C. pneumonia has actually been linked to some chronic conditions.
Really? Like what?
There's some evidence that it might play a role in the development of asthma, atherosclerosis, and even Alzheimer's disease.
Wait, Alzheimer's? That seems like kind of a jump going from, a respiratory infection to a neurodegenerative disease.
It is, and it's still an area of active research.
Right.
But C. pneumonia has been found in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease, and some studies suggest that chronic infection might actually contribute to those inflammatory processes.
Wow. Okay, so these bacteria are even sneakier than I thought.
They are.
Okay, and there's one more species on our list, right? Chlamydophilus psittaci.
That's right.
The one responsible for, what is it, parrot fever?
Yes, psittacosis, also known as parrot fever.
Right. I always associate that one with birds.
That makes sense. C. psittaci is mainly a bird pathogen, and humans can become infected through contact with infected birds.
Say, parrot owners and people who work with poultry need to be extra cautious, right?
Absolutely. Psittacosis usually presents as a flu-like illness,
Okay.
but it can be pretty severe in some cases, particularly for people with weakened immune systems.
So it sounds like, knowing which type of chlamydia you're dealing with is really important.
It is.
But how do we even go about diagnosing these infections?
Well, that's where things get a bit tricky. Because they're small and intracellular, they don't grow well on standard culture media.
Right. So we can't just, swab something and throw it on a plate and expect it to grow.
Not really. Traditionally, cell culture was considered the gold standard for diagnosis.
Okay.
Which involves growing the bacteria in a susceptible cell line, but this is very time-consuming and requires specialized facilities.
And not ideal if you need a quick answer. So what other options are there?
Luckily, there have been a lot of advances in diagnostic techniques. Direct immunofluorescence, or DIF, is faster than culture.
Okay.
And it uses fluorescently labeled antibodies to detect chlamydia directly in a sample.
Ah, okay. So we're looking for those glowing antibodies under the microscope.
Exactly. But it does require specialized equipment and expertise to interpret those results. And it's not always as sensitive as other methods.
Got it. Are there any other ways to diagnose these infections?
Another option is enzyme immunoassay, or EIA.
Okay, EIA.
which detects chlamydia antigens in clinical specimens. It's a fairly quick and easy test to perform, but it can be less specific than other methods, so you might get a false positive sometimes.
Oh, right. So it's a trade-off between speed and accuracy.
That's right. But there's also nucleic acid amplification tests, or NITs.
Okay.
Those are molecular tests
Okay.
that detect chlamydia DNA or RNA.
In the sample, right?
Yes, in the sample. And they're incredibly sensitive and specific.
Ooh, okay. So they can pick up even tiny amounts of chlamydia.
They can, and they're much less prone to those false positives than other methods.
So that's why they're becoming more common,
Right.
right? Like I feel like I'm hearing about nets being used more and more.
They are. They've pretty much become the preferred method in many settings because they're faster, more accurate, and can be automated.
Makes sense. So it sounds like we've got a good handle on how to find these sneaky bacteria, but just how common are these infections and who is most at risk?
Well, Chlamydia trachomatis is actually the most common bacterial sexually transmitted infection worldwide. Wow.
With an estimated 90 million new cases every year.
That's a huge number. And I'm assuming it's mostly young people who are getting infected.
Yeah, young adults, particularly women, are definitely disproportionately affected,
Right.
as are individuals with multiple sexual partners or a history of STIs.
So it's not just about age, it's also about behavior and social factors too.
Absolutely.
Okay, what about Chlamydophila pneumonia? Is that one also common?
It's very common. Studies suggest that over 50% of adults have been infected at some point.
Wow. More than half of us have had it. That's crazy.
It is. And because it's often asymptomatic, it kind of flies under the radar.
Makes sense. So what about Chlamydophila psittaci? How common is that one?
It's less common than the other two,
Yeah.
and the risk of infection is mostly linked to exposure to birds. So bird owners, poultry workers, and veterinarians are at higher risk.
So it sounds like we've got a good understanding of who's most likely to get infected. Now, what about prevention? Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves and our patients from these infections? There is. Prevention strategies depend on the specific type of chlamydia infection we're talking about.
Okay, so let's break it down, starting with trachoma. How do we combat this leading cause of preventable blindness?
Well, the WHO has a comprehensive strategy called SAFE.
SAFE. Okay, I like that. Easy to remember. What does it stand for?
It stands for surgery, antibiotics, facial cleanliness, and environmental improvements.
So a multi-pronged approach, attacking the problem from all angles.
Exactly. Surgery is used to correct trichiasis, the inward-turning eyelashes that can scratch the cornea and lead to blindness.
Right.
Antibiotics are crucial for treating active trachoma infections and preventing reinfection.
Makes sense.
Facial cleanliness emphasizes hand washing and hygiene to prevent the spread of infection.
Obviously important, yeah.
And environmental improvements, like access to clean water and sanitation, are essential for reducing transmission.
It's really about addressing those underlying social determinants of health, too.
Definitely.
Okay, so that's trachoma. What about those sexually transmitted chlamydia infections? What can we do to prevent those?
Well, prevention for those focuses on education, screening, and behavior modification.
So promoting safe sex practices and regular testing.
Exactly. It's all about educating individuals about the risks of chlamydia and other STIs, encouraging condom use, and promoting regular screening.
Especially among those high-risk groups we talked about.
Exactly. And finally, for psittaci or psittacosis, the key to prevention is minimizing exposure to infected birds.
Okay, so if you love birds, be smart about it.
Right. Bird owners should buy birds from reputable sources,
Okay,
quarantine new birds for a period of time, and practice good hygiene when handling birds.
makes sense.
And using protective measures like wearing masks and gloves when cleaning cages can help.
So prevention is a combination of awareness, behavior modification, and taking the right precautions. But what happens if we do get infected? What are our treatment options?
Well, most chlamydia infections are treatable with antibiotics.
That's good to hear.
But the specific antibiotic and the treatment duration depend on several factors, including the species involved, the site of infection, and the individual patient.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all.
Okay, so let's get specific. What are the go-to antibiotics for these infections?
For uncomplicated genital chlamydia caused by Chlamydia trachomatis, azithromycin is often the first choice.
What's this for myself? Okay.
It's effective, well-tolerated, and can be given in a single dose, which is great for patient compliance.
Definitely. A single dose is much easier to remember than taking pills every day for a week.
Absolutely.
Okay, so azithromycin for uncomplicated genital infections. What about other C. trachomatis infections, like trachoma or PID?
For those, we often use doxycycline, which is a tetracycline antibiotic.
Okay.
And it's usually given for a longer duration, 7 to 14 days.
Okay, so a longer course of treatment for those more complicated infections.
Right. And for respiratory infections caused by Chlamydophila pneumonia,
What do we use for those?
tetracyclines and macrolides are effective, like azithromycin or clarithromycin.
Okay, so those are good options for C. pneumonia. What about psittacosis caused by C. psittaci?
For that, tetracyclines are also the first-line treatment.
Okay.
But the treatment duration is longer, usually around 21 days,
Ah, okay.
to make sure the infection is completely gone.
So the treatment really depends on the specific infection and the patient.
It does.
But it's not just about antibiotics, right? There's more to managing these infections.
Right. Managing chlamydia infections involves a more holistic approach with patient education, partner notification, and addressing potential complications.
So it's not just about treating the infection, it's about preventing transmission and managing the long-term consequences as well.
Exactly. So with patient education, it's crucial to make sure they understand the nature of their infection,
Okay.
the importance of completing their full course of antibiotics, and the risks of reinfection.
And those long-term consequences if they don't take it seriously.
Exactly. We also need to emphasize the importance of safe sex practices to prevent transmission and reinfection.
Right. Safe sex is always important, even when you're not talking about chlamydia. What about partner notification? Why is that so important?
Partner notification is crucial, especially for sexually transmitted chlamydia.
Okay.
We need to make sure that all sexual partners are tested and treated even if they don't have any symptoms.
To break that chain of transmission.
Precisely. And finally, we need to address any potential complications.
Like PID and infertility.
Right. And in men, untreated chlamydia infections can lead to epididymitis, which is inflammation of the epididymis, which can also cause infertility.
So early detection and treatment are really, really important
They are.
to prevent all of these complications.
Exactly. And then we also haven't talked about C. pneumonia's potential role in asthma and atherosclerosis.
Oh, right.
It's important to manage those underlying conditions.
Yeah, definitely. To prevent any further complications. So managing chlamydia infections involves looking at the big picture, addressing both the immediate infection and the potential long-term consequences.
Exactly.
Well, I feel like we've really gone deep on this topic.
We have.
We've covered the different species, their sneaky life cycles, the different ways they can evade our immune systems, the range of infections they can cause, the challenges of diagnosis, and the importance of prevention, treatment, and management.
It's been a whirlwind tour, hasn't it?
It really has. But before we wrap things up, do you want to test our listeners' knowledge with a few exam-style questions?
Oh, I would love to.
Awesome. All right, listeners, get ready.
Okay, question number 1. Which of the following is not a characteristic of Chlamydia spp? Is it A, obligate intracellular parasite, B, possesses a large genome, C, has a unique biphasic life cycle, or D, sensitive to certain antibiotics like tetracyclines?
Take a minute to think about that one. Don't rush.
Okay, next question. Which species of chlamydia is primarily associated with respiratory infections and has been linked to chronic conditions like asthma?
Tricky one.
All right, question 3. True or false? All chlamydial infections are symptomatic. Do they always cause noticeable signs and symptoms?
I'm going to give you a hint. Think back to what we discussed about those silent infections.
Okay, 2 more questions to go. Question 4. What's the significance of the elementary body in the chlamydial life cycle? What makes the elementary body so special?
Think back to their journey.
And finally, question number 5. What does the SAFE strategy implemented by the WHO to control trachoma stand for? Think about the 4 key components of that strategy.
All right, that's it for our quiz. How did you do? Are you ready to go over the answers?
Let's do it. All right, let's revisit those questions and see how you did. Starting with question number 1, which of the following is not a characteristic of Chlamydia smethii? The correct answer is B, possesses a large genome.
Exactly. Remember we talked about how Chlamydiae have those surprisingly small genomes, even smaller than some viruses.
Right, and that small genome size actually reflects their efficiency in utilizing the host cell machinery.
It's like they've really streamlined their genetic material down to the bare essentials for survival and replication.
Precisely. They've essentially outsourced a lot of those essential functions to the host cell.
Bummer. Okay, question number 2. Which species of chlamydia is primarily associated with respiratory infections and has been linked to chronic conditions like asthma? The answer, of course, is Chlamydophila pneumonia.
Yep. See, pneumonia is a tricky one. It often causes mild or even asymptomatic respiratory infections, making it difficult to track and study.
And that's why its role in chronic conditions is still being investigated.
Exactly. Now, question 3. True or false, all chlamydial infections are symptomatic. What do you think?
The answer is false.
That's right. We can't emphasize this enough. Many chlamydial infections, especially those caused by Chlamydia, trachomatis, and C. pneumonia, can be completely asymptomatic.
Which is, a little bit scary because people might not even know they're infected and could be spreading the bacteria without realizing it.
Exactly. That silent spread makes it a major challenge for controlling these infections. All right, question number 4. What is the significance of the elementary body in the chlamydial life cycle? The key takeaway here is that the elementary body is the infectious form.
It's their tough, resilient form that allows them to survive outside of a host cell and spread from person to person.
Think of it as their little armored vehicle helping them travel from one host to the next.
I like that. And lastly, question 5. What does this safe strategy implemented by the WHO to control trachoma stand for? The answer is surgery, antibiotics, facial cleanliness, and environmental improvements.
Each of those components plays a crucial role in tackling this public health challenge.
Right. Surgery corrects those inward-turning eyelashes, antibiotics target the infection, facial cleanliness prevents spread, and environmental improvements address those broader issues like access to clean water and sanitation.
It's a holistic approach that addresses both the individual and the community levels of this problem.
Okay, deep divers, time for the answer key to our chlamydia quiz. Let's see how you did.
For question 1, we asked which of the following is not a characteristic of Chlamydia spp, and the correct answer is B, possesses a large genome.
They actually have those surprisingly small genomes, even smaller than some viruses, right?
Exactly, and that small genome size really highlights how efficient they are at utilizing the host cell's resources.
They've basically offloaded a bunch of their essential functions onto the host cell.
Exactly. Talk about working smarter, not harder.
On to question 2. Which species of chlamydia is primarily associated with respiratory infections and has been linked to those chronic conditions like asthma?
Chlamydophila pneumonia.
C. pneumonia. It's sneaky, often causing mild or even no symptoms, making it hard to track.
And that's why its potential role in chronic conditions is still being actively researched.
A good reminder that even those common, seemingly mild infections can have long-term implications. Question 3. True or false? All chlamydial infections are symptomatic. What do you think?
False.
False. Many chlamydial infections, especially those caused by Chlamydia trachomatis and C. pneumonia, can be totally silent.
Which is a huge challenge for controlling the spread because people might not know they're infected.
Regular screening is so important. All right, question 4. What is the significance of the elementary body in the chlamydial life cycle?
The elementary body is the infectious form.
It's that tough, hardy form that lets them survive outside a host cell and spread from person to person.
Good little survival pod.
Exactly. And finally, question 5. What does the SAFE strategy stand for?
Surgery, antibiotics, facial cleanliness, and environmental improvement.
The WHO's comprehensive plan for controlling trachoma.
It tackles the infection and all those factors that contribute to its spread.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from those unique life cycles to the importance of prevention, treatment, and management.
It's been a true deep dive into the world of Chlamydiaceae.
And to our listeners, we hope you found it helpful and maybe even a little bit intriguing. These bacteria may be tiny, but they certainly have a big impact.
And for those who want to delve even deeper, I highly recommend checking out Principles and Practice of Clinical Bacteriology by Gillespie and Hockey.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those microscopes focused.